The sound of aggressive knocking rattled my front door like a woodpecker on steroids. I set down my morning coffee and walked to the entrance, already sensing this wouldn't be a friendly neighbor introducing themselves with a casserole. Through the peephole, I saw a woman in her 50s clutching a clipboard like it was the nuclear codes, her face twisted in what I can only describe as righteous fury. I opened the door halfway. She said with a voice dripping with accusation, "I know exactly what you're doing here, and it stops today." Her name tag read Margaret Thornberry, HOA President, and she wielded that title like a medieval knight with a sword. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral despite the urge to laugh at her theatrical stance. She said with barely contained rage, "Don't play dumb with me. This property has been vacant for 6 months. You can't just break in and squat here. I've already called the police." I raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Save it for the authorities," she interrupted, jabbing her pen at me like it was a weapon. "I have photographic evidence of you trespassing. The Maplewood Estates HOA has zero tolerance for criminals." The sound of sirens grew closer, and Margaret's face lit up with vindictive glee. A sheriff's cruiser pulled into my driveway, and Deputy Martinez stepped out, someone I recognized from the courthouse. "Your Honor," Deputy Martinez said with genuine surprise and respect, tipping his hat. "I didn't know you'd moved into the neighborhood. Is everything all right here?" Margaret's clipboard slipped from her fingers, clattering on the concrete. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Your Honor," she stammered. "I suppose I should explain how I ended up in this predicament. 3 weeks earlier, I'd inherited this vacation home from my late Aunt Eleanor. After 20 years of practicing law and my recent appointment as a circuit court judge, I desperately needed a break from the chaos of the city. The plan was simple: take a 6-month sabbatical, enjoy some peace and quiet, and maybe write that legal thriller I'd been outlining in my head for years. Maplewood Estates seemed perfect, a gated community 45 minutes from downtown, surrounded by oak trees and blessed silence. I'd intentionally kept a low profile, parking my modest sedan in the garage and avoiding the community gatherings. After years in the public eye, anonymity felt like a luxury I wasn't ready to surrender. What I hadn't counted on was Margaret Thornberry, whose reign over the HOA apparently required knowing every resident's social security number, blood type, and preferred brand of cereal. As I would later learn, she ran the association like her personal kingdom, where every blade of grass measured exactly 2.5 inches and trash cans placed at the curb 1 minute early warranted written warnings. The trouble started when I forgot to submit my HOA registration paperwork. In my defense, I was still processing my aunt's estate and adjusting to suburban life. But in Margaret's world, this oversight was tantamount to declaring war on civilized society. She first noticed my car during one of her routine community wellness checks, which neighbors later told me was code for snooping. My out-of-state plates and tinted windows apparently screamed criminal activity to her hyperactive imagination. She started documenting my every move with the dedication of a wildlife photographer stalking an endangered species. Day 1. She photographed my car from 6 different angles. Day 3. She was caught by my security camera peering through my dining room window, later claiming she was checking for signs of forced entry. By the end of the first week, she created a binder titled Evidence of Illegal Occupation at 427 Oak Ridge Drive, complete with color-coded tabs and a table of contents. She said to her lieutenant, Janet Morrison, with conspiratorial excitement, "That man arrives at odd hours, never attends HOA meetings, and I've never seen him receive mail. Classic squatter behavior." Janet, who I later learned was a retired librarian with too much time and too little skepticism, eagerly joined the crusade. Together, they recruited other residents into their surveillance network, spinning tales of dangerous criminals infiltrating their peaceful community. "We must protect our property values," Margaret declared at an emergency HOA meeting I obviously wasn't invited to attend. This squatter could be running drugs, planning burglaries, or worse, lowering our community standards. The irony, of course, was that I spent most evenings reading case law and binge-watching legal dramas while eating takeout from the Thai place down the street. My most rebellious act was occasionally parking slightly crooked in my own driveway. Margaret's paranoia reached new heights when she discovered I'd had furniture delivered. she said with alarm to anyone who'd listen. "He's not just squatting, he's moving in permanently. We need to act before he claims squatters' rights." She filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, which she conveniently headed, and voted to pursue legal action. The vote was unanimous, mostly because the other board members were either too intimidated to disagree or genuinely believed her manufactured crisis. Then came the confrontation that would become Maplewood Estates' legend. Margaret organized what she called a citizens' intervention, which involved her, Janet, and 3 other residents marching to my door on a Saturday morning with cameras rolling and 911 on speed dial. I answered the door in my weekend clothes, jeans and an old law school t-shirt, which Margaret later described as the uniform of a professional vagrant. She announced with the authority of someone who'd watched too many cop shows, "Sir, you are illegally occupying this premises. I demand you provide proof of ownership or vacate immediately." "Ma'am," I replied calmly, "I'm not obligated to show you anything. This is private property." My refusal to produce documentation sent her into overdrive. She said with increasing volume, "That's exactly what a criminal would say. I know the previous owner, Eleanor Hartman, and she would never rent to someone like you." "Someone like me?" I asked, genuinely curious about her assumptions. "Someone who skulks around, refuses to participate in community activities, and probably doesn't even have a real job," she spat. I almost told her that Eleanor was my aunt and that my fake job involved presiding over cases that could land people in prison for decades. Instead, I simply said, "Have a nice day," and closed the door. That's when she called the police, claiming I'd threatened her, a complete fabrication that would later prove to be her undoing. The real circus began 2 weeks later when Margaret, frustrated by the police's refusal to arrest me on her word alone, filed a civil complaint. She sought an emergency injunction to remove me from her community and demanded $50,000 in damages for emotional distress and decreased property values. Her attorney, clearly working on contingency and blinded by Margaret's conviction, failed to do basic due diligence. They never ran a property records check, never verified my identity, and certainly never bothered to Google Judge William Chen, which would have saved everyone a lot of embarrassment. The case was assigned to my courthouse, poetic justice at its finest. My colleague Judge Patricia Williams was originally supposed to hear it, but she was attending a judicial conference. The replacement. Yours truly, back from sabbatical a few days early to help with the caseload. I could have recused myself, probably should have, but where's the fun in that? Besides, Margaret had made this personal when she'd spent 3 weeks terrorizing me for the crime of existing in my own home. The courtroom was packed that Thursday morning. Margaret had rallied her supporters, all eager to see the dangerous squatter get his comeuppance. She sat at the plaintiff's table wearing her best power suit, radiating smugness like a nuclear reactor. Her attorney began with theatrical flair. "Your Honor, we're here today to address a grave threat to the safety and security of Maplewood Estates. The defendant has illegally occupied." "Counselor," I interrupted from behind the file I was pretending to review, "has your client verified the ownership of the property in question?" "Well, Your Honor, the defendant has refused to provide any documentation." "That's not what I asked. Has your client conducted a title search? Checked public records? Done any actual investigation beyond harassment and speculation?" Margaret's attorney shifted uncomfortably. "My client has extensive photographic evidence of suspicious behavior." "Taking pictures of someone's car is evidence of suspicious behavior, all right," I said dryly. "Just not the defendant's." Margaret couldn't contain herself. She stood up and declared, "Your Honor, I know what I saw. This man is a fraud. He's probably not even employed. I demand justice." I slowly lowered the file and looked directly at her. The blood drained from her face as recognition dawned. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. "Mrs. Thornberry," I said with professional calm that belied my inner satisfaction, "would you care to explain to the court why you've spent the last 3 weeks stalking, harassing, and defaming a sitting circuit court judge?" The courtroom erupted in whispers. Margaret's attorney looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Margaret herself swayed on her feet, gripping the table for support. I didn't. Your Honor, I had no idea," she stammered. Ignorance is not a defense for harassment, filing false police reports, or defamation, I continued. You never asked my name. Never introduced yourself as a neighbor. Never extended the basic courtesy of a conversation before launching your campaign of intimidation. Her attorney tried to salvage the situation. Your Honor, perhaps we could discuss dismissing. Oh, we're well past dismissal, I said. Mrs. Thornberry filed a false police report claiming I threatened her. She's distributed flyers with my photo calling me a criminal. She's trespassed on my property repeatedly. And now she's wasted this court's time with a frivolous lawsuit based entirely on her own prejudices and paranoia. I turned to the court clerk. Please note for the record that I'm filing countercharges for harassment, defamation, trespassing, and filing a false police report. I'm also recommending this case to the State Bar for review of counsel's failure to perform basic due diligence. Margaret's attorney went pale. Your Honor, surely we can. Additionally, I continued, I'm ordering Mrs. Thornberry to pay all court costs, my attorney fees, yes, I'll be hiring one for the countersuit, and $10,000 in punitive damages to be donated to the local Fair Housing Alliance. $10,000? Margaret shrieked, her composure completely shattered. Would you prefer we discuss criminal charges for the false police report? I asked. That carries up to 6 months in jail and additional fines. She collapsed into her chair, her face a mask of horror as she realized the full scope of her situation. Her attorney whispered urgently in her ear, undoubtedly calculating how quickly he could withdraw from the case. Court is adjourned, I announced, bringing down the gavel with perhaps more force than necessary. As the bailiff escorted a shell-shocked Margaret from the courtroom, I heard her whisper to her attorney, "How much will this cost me?" "With the countersuit, attorney fees, and damages," he replied grimly. "Probably close to $30,000. And that's if you avoid criminal charges." Margaret let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a whimper as the reality hit her. 3 weeks of harassment had just cost her a year's salary, and her reputation was destroyed.